I'm Jason Pollard. I'm a forester and section manager with City of Ottawa Forestry Services. And my primary responsibilities over the last several years have been related to implementing the City of Ottawa's emerald ash borer management strategy.
A question from James Walmsley of Bangor University was, how do Ottawa City go about horizon scanning to identify possible future tree pests and diseases, and more generally, what might have they learnt from EAB in terms of preparing yourself for future outbreaks?
So for some of the horizon scanning, a lot of the information we get, we're relying on our provincial and federal partners. So in a Canadian context, we're at the municipal level. We have provincially the Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry, so we rely on that group for information on pest monitoring and pests of national or international significance that may be coming our way. And also in addition to that, we're looking federally to our partners with the Canadian Forest Service and the Canadian Food Inspection Agency, which in Canada is the agency which regulates for pests outside Canada's borders, so pests of national or international significance. They would provide some oversight and monitoring and regulations for anything coming our way. So those group of agencies, provincially and federally, have professionals and scientists and researchers, entomologists, etc., who would be providing information to foresters, to municipalities, to groups who work in the forest on what might be coming our way and what to watch out for, and what signs and symptoms, for example, that an insect of significance that might be coming our way, and what that might do to a tree and how a tree might look if it were to become infested. So some examples of things we've done recently, we've working with that group of agencies federally, provincially, we've done some training here in Ottawa with our staff and kind of watching what might be coming our way. So we talked earlier, Nick, about Asian longhorn beetle. That's an example of a pest of international significance, both in Europe and Canada and the US, coming from different parts of Asia. So that's one in particular that we're watching here because of the significance of maple in Canada. That particular beetle, maple is within its host range. So that's a concern here. So we've done very specific training on that pest. So we've set up a simulation site in Ottawa with our federal and provincial partners to run training sessions out of. So we've have a group of trees that were set up, simulated with an Asian longhorn beetle attack, and we can run our staff through that. And we've locally brought in other partners to run training through that site. So, although there's many pests of significance, that's an example of one where we focused on and done some work with some partners to help share some information on.
Yeah. This is a question from Andrew Smith of the Forestry Commission. He says, given the possibility that emerald ash borer was spread by firewood movement and that sanitation felling perhaps exaggerated firewood supply and movement problems, if the authorities in Ottawa were starting from scratch again, would they have attempted sanitation fellings, or would they have done anything else differently in terms of a response to emerald ash borer?
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, I guess in a way, looking back, our hindsight's 20/20. There could be some things we would do differently. One of the issues with firewood movement is that it's very difficult to control, particularly in Canada. Firewood can come from many different sources and can move many different ways. So there's been a lot of focus federally and provincially, and even from us as the municipality, warning about the issues associated with firewood movement, especially long-distance firewood movements. We've kind of communicated out on that. In the early days of emerald ash borer, or discovering emerald ash borer here in Ottawa, one of the things that we put in place right away was controlling wood movement from city properties. So we knew that looking at other jurisdictions in Canada or the US that have been dealing with emerald ash borer, that wood management or how wood waste is handled was an issue. So we right away put things in place to control where our ash wood was moving. So for any removals or pruning of ash that we were doing, once we knew emerald ash borer was here, we put some processes in place to make sure that was all funneled to one site. Initially in Ottawa, we even had restrictions on the time of year that we were doing pruning and removal of ash, because we wanted to be, I guess, somewhat conservative in our approach, so that we didn't want to be moving ash wood material during insect flight season. So for a period of months during the year, we said no ash would be removed unless it was, more urgent work that needed to be done. But very quickly through monitoring, we recognized that emerald ash borer was well established here. It had been here a period of years, and we were very quickly dealing with a quite expansive problem. So that we since removed those restrictions in terms of time of year, just in order to be practical with what we're doing with tree removal operations. So with firewood movement, we put some controls in place to deal with what was happening on city property. So that wasn't as much of a concern. In terms of what we would do differently, there could be some merit in looking at heavily infested trees and moving somewhat rapidly or quickly to remove those. It seems with this particular insect, there may be small groups of individual trees or stands of trees that become quite heavily infested, and may, if rapid response was considered in that context, moving quickly may have at least some local suppression of an increasing EAB population. But I think tree removal overall, probably, just given the experience in Canada and the US, probably wasn't looked at or isn't looked at as a widespread control tool, simply because this beetle is very difficult to detect at low populations. Don't have really good survey techniques, although those are improving. Detecting this beetle at a low population is still very difficult. So, we're getting better tools in terms of branch sampling or trapping that's coming from some of the Canadian researchers, but as a really early detection tool of finding this bug early and then putting your program in place, there's still some work to do, I think. So what we would do differently, looking back, maybe there are ways that you can look at suppressing those spot infestations of VAB through tree removal or pesticide application. And in doing that, maybe you're buying more time to put in place your other components of a program, such as tree planting. So those are the types of things that we would consider looking back. But I think when we were putting our programs in place, we already had experience we could take from those in the US or those in southwestern Ontario, that we could kind of learn from what they experienced.
And in terms of that kind of sanitation approach, obviously you have control of what you're doing on city property, but how effective were you, how able were you in influencing private property and trees on private land? Because we've been to some sites together where there are existing dead and infested trees on private land next door to trees that you're treating to reduce the effects of EAB, and that's quite a challenge. Has there been any formal movement to influence private trees?
Well, unfortunately, we don't have, as a municipality, the legislative tools to control movement of invasive species or live wood material from private property. There are some tools or legislation that federal government would have, or now the provincial government as well, through some new legislation that's passed provincially,
Yeah.
they may have in the future, looking beyond EAB and other pests, they may have those tools in the future to be able to somewhat restrict what's moving from private property in the event of a new insect infestation. But from us locally, we can control what happens on city property, but we really can't control what happens on private.
Yeah.
We can talk to homeowners if there's a dead tree or a dangerous tree. There are some tools that we have that we can assure that things are made safe. But in terms of movement and so forth of wood material, we can't directly control that. We don't have that authority. However, we can educate, we can speak with homeowners, we can talk to community groups or large property owners for private property and outline what the city establishes as a best practice and try and educate and raise awareness around what best practices mean and you know, the benefits that a homeowner could see from putting in place some measures against the EAB or restricting wood movement so as not to spread to new parts of Ottawa or new parts of Ontario or other parts of Canada. So, you know, those messages have been out there, but in terms of legislative tool or restrictive approach, we don't really have something that we can put in place.
Yeah.
Yeah.